the German U-boat commander who sank 11 Allied ships. Documentary script outline: 11 ships. That number sits quietly in the historical record, stripped of drama, filed among thousands of similar entries in the war logs of the Kriegsmarine. But strip away the bureaucratic language, and the number becomes something else entirely. 11 ships means hundreds of thousands of tons of steel, fuel, food, and ammunition pulled beneath the Atlantic surface. It means convoys that never arrived. It means a war that came terrifyingly close to being decided not on the beaches of Normandy, but in the cold, featureless darkness of the open ocean. The question this story demands is not simply how. It is what kind of war makes this possible and what it ultimately costs. To understand this commander, you must first understand the ocean he fought in. Britain in 1941 was not merely an ally. It was the last functioning democracy standing between Nazi-occupied Europe and any realistic hope of liberation. And Britain, uniquely vulnerable among the major powers, could not feed itself, fuel itself, or arm itself without a continuous flow of ships crossing 3,000 miles of open Atlantic water. Churchill would later write that the U-boat threat was the only aspect of the war that genuinely frightened him. Not the Blitz, not the fall of France, but the slow arithmetic of ships lost against ships built. Germany understood this arithmetic clearly. The U-boat campaign was not designed to win battles. It was designed to win the war through strangulation, to sever the supply lines that kept Britain alive and the Allied cause viable. This was the strategic stage on which our commander would operate. He was not born a predator. Like most officers of the Kriegsmarine's submarine arm, he came of age in a Germany defined by defeat, economic collapse, and the slow rebuilding of national identity through military revival. He entered naval service in the 1930s, trained within a submarine culture that prized technical precision, psychological composure, and institutional loyalty above almost everything else. The Kriegsmarine did not produce reckless men. It produced disciplined ones, men who understood machinery, who could read water and weather, and who had been conditioned to interpret orders as the highest form of professional obligation. By the time war came, he was not a fanatic. He was a professional. That distinction matters because it explains nearly everything that followed. Before examining what this commander achieved, it is necessary to understand where he achieved it. A Type 7 U-boat measured approximately 67 meters in length and housed a crew of roughly 50 men in a space most people could not endure for an afternoon. There was no privacy. There was no fresh air beyond what mechanical systems could provide. There was no natural light below the surface. No silence, no stillness, only the constant vibration of diesel engines and the awareness that a few centimeters of steel separated every man aboard from a pressure that would crush them instantly. Condensation gathered on every surface. Food rotted within days. Patrols lasted weeks. In this environment, the commander's authority was not merely administrative, it was existential. His composure set the psychological temperature of the entire vessel. Effectiveness in submarine warfare was never purely tactical. It was, above all, a contest of human endurance. The early patrols were not yet defined by confirmed kills. They were defined by learning how convoys moved, how escort patterns shifted, how hydrophone readings translated into target positions in the dark. The commander operated within a broader strategic framework that NITS called the Rudeltaktik, Wolfpack Coordination, where multiple submarines would shadow a convoy across hundreds of miles before attacking in sequence. But effective commanders also developed instincts that no doctrine could fully encode. When to surface, when to wait, when the mathematics of position, fuel, and torpedoes aligned into a decision that could not be reversed. The after-action reports from these early patrols read with clinical detachment. Tonnage confirmed. Grid coordinates logged. Patrol concluded. What those reports did not record was the view from the conning tower afterward, when the surface returned to silence. The engagements that built this commander's record did not happen in a single dramatic operation. They accumulated across multiple patrols, in different grid sectors, against different convoy formations. The targets varied: tankers carrying fuel essential to Allied operations, cargo vessels loaded with grain and machinery, troop ships moving personnel across the Atlantic. Each represented not just tonnage, but a specific function in the Allied war economy, and the commander understood that distinction. He was not hunting randomly. He was hunting strategically. One engagement stands as representative of the whole: a convoy detected by hydrophone well before visual contact. Hours of patient repositioning, running submerged, adjusting course incrementally as the sound signatures clarified. Then the surface run under darkness, the firing solution calculated, the torpedo away. Always the wait, measured in seconds, that stretched into something longer. Then the impact, the detonation carried through the water before it reached the ears. And then silence, broken only by the sea itself reclaiming the surface. The commander logged the result, noted the tonnage estimate, and ordered the boat repositioned. There was no celebration recorded in the war diary. There rarely was. The work continued because the war continued. The Allies were not passive witnesses to their own losses. From the earliest months of the U-boat campaign, British naval intelligence, scientific advisors, and convoy planners were engaged in a systematic effort to understand, predict, and counter submarine tactics. Radar technology evolved rapidly. Escort vessels were equipped with improved ASDIC sonar. Long-range Consolidated Liberator aircraft began closing the mid-Atlantic gap, the vast stretch of ocean previously beyond land-based air cover where U-boats had operated with dangerous freedom. Depth charge patterns were refined based on the physics of submarine evasion. Every innovation the U-boat commanders developed was studied, cataloged, and answered. The commander's effectiveness had made him precisely the kind of threat that concentrates institutional attention. The ocean that had once favored him was quietly, methodically being redesigned against him. 11 ships. The number is clean. The reality it represents is not. The men aboard those vessels were not soldiers in any conventional sense. They were merchant sailors, engineers, deckhands, radio operators, cooks, civilians employed in the business of keeping supply lines open. When a ship went down in the Atlantic, survival odds were determined by water temperature, proximity to rescue, and time. In winter waters, that time was measured in minutes. Many of the men lost in this campaign have no individual entries in any historical record. They are absorbed into aggregate casualty figures. The commander's war diary preserves the tonnage. Their names, in most cases, were never recorded beside it. By the spring of 1943, the strategic calculus of the Atlantic War had inverted. In May of that year alone, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 submarines. NITS temporarily withdrew the wolf packs from the North Atlantic, an acknowledgement, rarely made explicitly, that the campaign had failed.
The commanders who had once operated with near impunity now entered patrol zones where Allied aircraft, escort carriers, and hunter-killer groups waited with tools specifically engineered to find them. The ocean had not changed. The war within it had changed entirely. 11 ships. We return to that number now carrying everything the story has placed beside it. The convoys, the crews, the cold arithmetic of the Atlantic, the machinery of a war that demanded complete professional commitment from the men it employed and offered them very little in return.
This commander's record did not save Germany. The Battle of the Atlantic, for all its early devastation, was ultimately lost by the side that began it. What his story illuminates is something more durable than outcome. It shows how institutions shape men, how wars create the conditions for acts that would be unthinkable outside them. and how history tends to preserve the numbers while quietly losing the human texture surrounding them. The Battle of the Atlantic determined whether Europe could be reached at all. It was won not through a single decisive engagement, but through the accumulated endurance of thousands of men on both sides of the surface.